Hello, everybody. Welcome in to the Ding You here at The Athletic, presented by BetMGM. I am Michael Beller. I will be hosting Ding You. We are super excited for this. We're going to be covering the NCAA tournament right here all the way through the championship game. From every possible angle, we are going to have a heavy bet focus on the betting world, thanks to our friends at BetMGM. We're going to talk about on-court, at the sportsbook, every single thing that will help you get your brackets right, help you get your bets right, at least we hope so, getting yourself all the way through the NCAA tournament. I will be joined every single episode by my co-host, Brian Bennett. And Brian, year ago at this time, you and I were lamenting a tournament that we did not have after we had led up to it for so many weeks with our podcast. Now here we are 1 year later, getting the NCAA tournament that we are so excited for. Very happy to be doing this with you, my friend.
So thrilled. It's always been my favorite week of the year, and to have it be taken away last year really makes me appreciate it more. I got my giant bracket on the wall behind me. I am so ready for this. Let's tip it off and let's talk about it.
Yeah, that bracket makes me feel like, past years where I've actually been on site covering the tournament. You always see those brackets, back in the media area. Obviously, we are not there this year, but still enjoying it the way that we can. We've got a great show for you here, and we are going to start out by considering some Final Four and national championship odds, region by region. Again, these are coming to us from BetMGM. And Brian, let's start with the region that gives us the number one overall seed. That is the West region, where we find Gonzaga not only as the obvious favorite, but as the only team at the start of the tournament that has minus odds to win its region. You see right there, minus 175 before you get down to Iowa at plus 650. And then a couple of plus 1,000s, 10-1 on Kansas and Virginia. You actually come back down to plus 800 for Creighton. You see the 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10s as well. When you look at this region, I mean, Gonzaga is obviously the favorite, and for good reason, but could you make a value-based argument for anyone else here?
Yeah, I'm not going to bet against Gonzaga here because not only are they the best team, but they've already beaten Iowa, Virginia, and Kansas handily, and I don't really see the rematch changing that. However, if I were going to make a bet, and it would be a strict value play, and that would be on Oregon, the number 7 seed. That's a team that was playing really well down the stretch. They did get upset by Oregon State in the Pac-12 tournament, but I don't think we should base all our decisions on one outcome. Oregon State obviously is playing very well down the stretch, but Oregon, always a team that's difficult to play this time of year. Dana Altman with a lot of switching defenses. Will Richardson coming back for them has made them a really dangerous club. And as a 7 seed, that means they'd be down on the other side of the bracket. Maybe could get to the Elite 8, and then you take your chances with an upset. So with those odds, what is it, 1,600? If I were going to make any kind of bet, that's where I put my money.
It's an interesting bet, and we have seen an Oregon team that has, over the last few years, right, get stronger and stronger in the second half of the season, and it was a similar path that team followed this year. I really do find it very, very hard to go against Gonzaga, even from the standpoint of trying to find value. If I were going to do it, the team that I would look at would actually probably be Iowa, only because I just don't think there's any slowing down Gonzaga's offense. I think if you were going to beat them, if someone ends up beating them over these next 3 weeks, it's going to be a team that can score with them. You're going to have to put up, I think, 80 plus in a game to beat Gonzaga. And Iowa's the team that can do that. They did that against Gonzaga earlier in the season. Of course, Gonzaga scored like 97 in that game. So Iowa was unable to win it, but they can score with Gonzaga when they are at their A game. So that's the team that I would look at here. And, as tempting as it is to take what feels like an easy bet on Gonzaga minus 175, just doesn't feel right. Any team is just one bad shooting night away from losing in the NCAA tournament. So the minus 175, hard to get to on Gonzaga. Let's throw it over to the South region, where Baylor, the number 1 seed, is coming in at plus 100 to make the Final Four. Then we've got Ohio State at plus 600, a group of teams at plus 1,000 that includes not only the 3, 4, and 5 seeds, Arkansas, Purdue, and Villanova, but also number 8 North Carolina. That's interesting to me, if only because even if they win that first round game against Wisconsin, then they're faced right up against Baylor. So it's interesting to see them coming in at plus 1,000 with such better odds than what we see from Florida, who would have to have, a seemingly easier path going up against Ohio State should they get past Virginia Tech in that first round matchup. Let's talk about the same thing here, Brian. Baylor, the obvious favorite, but can you make a value-based argument for anyone else to get out of the region?
Yeah, it's similar to Gonzaga. I wouldn't bet against Baylor in this region if I didn't have to. But if I'm looking for value, I think there's a lot of good value picks in this region. I like Texas Tech at plus 800. They kind of up and down at times this year, but obviously with that defense of Chris Beard, last time we saw a tournament, they were in the title game in overtime. So that's a team I think could make a run, especially that defense could really gobble people up. Now that the problem is, do they end up playing Baylor? Baylor would be very familiar with that. But if there's some upsets along the way, I could see that. I could see Arkansas plus 1,000. That's a pretty tasty number for me. Really talented team. Played extremely well down the stretch. Obviously lost to LSU in the SEC tournament, but before that had won 12 straight SEC games. So a team coming in with a lot of confidence. So, and even Purdue, I think, if they could get hot, I think they're a bit too young. And in fact, I may be picking them to get upset here later on the show, but I think there are some good value plays, and even Ohio State at plus 600 for a 2 seed. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, for a 2 seed that just nearly won the Big Ten tournament. They beat Michigan, of course, without Isaiah Livers, and then push Illinois and almost win that game too. So Ohio State, a very high ceiling playing their way onto the 2 line. I think that's where there is some value in this one. I have trouble trusting Arkansas's offense. It's a very high-powered offense when it is going right, but we've seen some up and down from them this season. Purdue's going to be awesome next year. We're going to be talking about them as one of the favorites next year when we get our first way too early top 25s. Purdue's going to be in there, but I think maybe a year ahead of schedule. Keep on throwing your questions into the chat. We will be taking those as we go along in this show. For now, however, let's move on into the Midwest region where we do find the Big Ten champions, at least the Big Ten tournament champions. And down in Champaign, they would tell you the outright Big Ten champions across the board, plus 150 to win this region. Then we've got Houston at plus 500, West Virginia plus 600, Oklahoma State, the interesting one, coming in at plus 400. Obviously, this is a team that surged down the stretch. Cade Cunningham is a couple of months away from being the number 1 overall pick in the draft, and you see the rest of this region here. But Oklahoma State's the most interesting one, I think, to talk about here, Brian. Interesting to see them as the 4 and West Virginia as the 3 in this region, especially with bracketing principles. Feels awfully easy for the committee to have flipped those two, make Oklahoma State the 3, West Virginia the 4, and give us the possibility of Ayo Dosunmu against Cade Cunningham in the Elite 8. Now that's looking like a Sweet 16 matchup if all the matchups hold here. But that's where I would go in this region, even though I think Illinois is the best team for sure. Getting those plus odds on a team like Oklahoma State has me really intrigued. Where are you at in this one?
Yeah, and looking at Oklahoma State as the number 2 betting choice in this region tells you that the committee really screwed up with its seeding. I mean, they really should have been a 3 seed. I thought they had a chance to be a 2 seed if they would have beaten Texas in the Big 12 tournament title game. For them to be a 4 seed is just absurd. They had the second most quad 1 wins in the country behind Illinois. For them to be a 4 seed and then perhaps play Illinois is pretty crazy. And you're talking about Brad Underwood could maybe play Loyola Chicago in the second round in his old school Oklahoma State in the Sweet 16. I'm sure he's thrilled about that. But West Virginia with a special talent, number 1 overall pick, and Cade Cunningham. I'm sorry, Oklahoma State with them. There certainly would be the team to go here if you're looking for a little bit of value. Although plus 400 for a 4 seed is not all that great a value.
And you talk about Loyola, too, with the season that they had dominating the Missouri Valley and then getting a very tough draw. Tough draw for both of those teams. Yeah. Loyola and Georgia Tech having to face one another in the first round. Those are 2 teams with some second weekend juice, and one of them is going to go out after 1 game. So that'll be among the best games of the first round. Finally, let's take a look at the East region here. Michigan at plus 175. Look, you're not going to get great odds on a 1 seed, but if Isaiah Livers is good to go, if they can survive this first weekend and Isaiah Livers is good to go for the Sweet 16, plus 175 feels very good on Michigan. Alabama at plus 400. We know what the deal is with that team. One of the best offensive teams in the country, and Herb Jones, one of the best takeover players in the country. A lot of love for both Texas and Florida State. We see them coming in at plus 550 and plus 500 respectively. Very little love for the Colorado Buffaloes coming in at plus 1200, 6 through 10. You can see there on the screen. UConn at plus 800. We know what James Bouknight means for that team, giving us maybe some memories of Shabazz Napier in years past. Has them at plus 800 with better odds to come out of this region than BYU then Colorado. It's a really fun region. It's a really interesting region. Where are your eyes drawn to when you look at that chart?
Yeah, this is my favorite region by far of the four. Especially because it's just so wide open with the liver situation. But boy, I love Texas. Texas is my dark horse national title contender. You may see me pick them in the Final Four here in a few minutes. Plus 550. I think that's a pretty good number. They'd have to go through Alabama and maybe Michigan, so that would be tough. But the way they're playing, all their athleticism, they're tough. They got good veteran guards. That's a team I really have a shine for at this point. And then Florida State at plus 500. A team no one's really going to want to match up with because of their size, their length, their athleticism, their depth. They have had some issues. They have given up, a lot of turnovers in some games, especially against Georgia Tech. So you wonder if they can win 4 in a row against good competition. But those two would be the way I would go, just for the value and for the teams you're getting.
Yeah, that's where I get into a little bit of trouble with Florida State, a team that I just have trouble trusting their 3-weekend-long consistency. And that's why, even though I think plus 500, just based on their talent alone and just the style of play that they're going to bring is interesting, is intriguing, I have trouble trusting them to win these 4 games to get to the Final Four. And again, as I said, if Isaiah Livers is back, I think we're going to be looking at plus 175 for Michigan as pretty friendly odds to the better. Of course, we're going to be making that decision semi-blind as we get ready for the start of the first couple of rounds of the NCAA tournament. Please keep on sending your questions. We are happy to take all of them. Bracket, betting, futures, whatever it might be. Populate the YouTube chat with those questions, and we will get to them throughout the show. For now, however, we are going to bring on one of our partners over at BetMGM, Jason Scott. Jason is the VP of trading at BetMGM. Basically, we're looking at the head odds maker for BetMGM out in Las Vegas. Jason, thanks so much for joining us today.
Afternoon, gentlemen. How are you?
We are doing great. We are very excited. I know you must be as well, getting ready for a tournament that starts 24 hours later than we are used to. We're not going to get that Thursday to Sunday feel that we love. It's a Friday to Monday feel this year, but still very happy to get it going. Selection Sunday just a couple of days ago, revealing the field of 68 and all the matchups. And as Brian and I were just talking about, all the Final Four and championship futures that we've seen. With those now out there for a couple of days, which teams have you seen getting the most action in the futures market?
It's two-way traffic. It was three-way traffic, but Isaiah Livers' injuries means we're not seeing much money for Michigan. But we're only laying Illinois and this is Gonzaga. It makes sense, Illinois. They're sort of, the plus 600, plus 700, the team that's on the roll. They've got the big guy. They've got the closer. And Gonzaga, as you mentioned before, they've beaten all the other number one seeds. They've had one game under double figures. It makes sense that they're going to be popular. As a bookmaker, laying plus 200 for a team to win 6 games makes sense. But then you look at it from the other angle, who's going to beat them?
Yeah, and Jason, what are some of the most popular upset picks that you're seeing so far this week?
Yeah, it's very similar. People love momentum, and Georgetown have been the best back to both at the money line and plus 4.5 coming, or it was plus 5 down to plus 4.5 coming out of the tournament win, and to a lesser degree, but still reasonably popular, Utah State. They've sort of been round plus buy. We've had plenty of money, and there is a trickle, obviously, on the back of the COVID situation, that perhaps Eastern Washington can pull up a huge upset against Kansas, given the upheaval. From what I understand, the guys in Kansas are sort of traveling on the late. Whether they're practicing, nobody knows. I think that's a Hail Mary, but we're certainly seeing a trickle of money there.
Yeah, they're not the only high seed dealing with that as well. Virginia also, and they, I'm assuming, are getting a little bit of flack coming in against them with Ohio, a team that, and Jason Preston has a guy that writes the right formula for a underdog to make a little bit of a run here, a superstar who can definitely put his team on his back. Let's go back up to the top of the field here. The 4 number 1 seeds, obviously, they've got the shortest championship odds. They're followed then by a trio of 2 seeds, Iowa, Ohio State, and Alabama. Right there with those 2 seeds is an Oklahoma State team that we just talked about a little bit. They're the number 4 seed in the Midwest region. They're going to have to get through Illinois, one of the hottest teams in the country, just to get to the Elite 8. So a very tough path in front of Cade Cunningham and the Cowboys, but still looked at as one of the top teams to win the NCAA tournament. How do we arrive at a price like this for Oklahoma State?
I think you summed it up earlier. I heard you mentioning that frankly, their seeding's wrong. And for us, I've learned for a very long time, you've got to let the market tell you what prices a team should be, both in the futures and in games. And we're just seeing a constant trickle of money. It's Cade Cunningham that's bringing people in. But we're seeing nearly twice as much money for that team than what we're seeing for someone like Alabama, despite them winning the conference and being roughly the same price. So public sentiment causes that, and it seems that most people agree that they're the wrong seeding. There probably should be a 3. In saying that, meeting Illinois in the Sweet 16, and Tennessee isn't going to be an easy beat in the second round. Even maybe there's a chance in the first round they can get beaten. So 16-1 seems short enough to me.
Jason, we mentioned the liver situation at Michigan a couple of times already, but how do you handle a situation like that when you have such an important player on one of the top teams? When you're setting odds, and have you seen that maybe affect the betting so far?
Look, frankly, for us, given the injury, given it's an ankle or foot, they're the ones where we're happy. As a bookmaker, you're happy to take the biggest risk on. They can't win the tournament without him in our eyes. They're no certainty. They've got a so-called easy draw game 1, but they're no certainty to get through the rest of it. We're happy to be towards the top of the market and bring some money in Michigan to all of our customers in the good state.
I mean, it's as a bettor, it's a bet that I'm a little bit comfortable taking the risk on, just because of how efficient and how good they were with livers, and maybe more in a bracket pool where you're going to see so many people come off of them, especially with the popularity of the 1 seeds. Maybe I feel a little bit better about taking them a round or 2 farther than I would have because of the popularity of the other ones, and maybe you get a little bit of an edge, a little bit of pot odds by trusting Michigan and hoping that livers is back. But I do understand how they are being treated and why they're being treated the way they are in the betting market. We got one more question here for you, Jason. The prop market getting rolling along. You guys at BetMGM are offering lines on which conference is going to win the national championship. Can the Big Ten finally break that 21-year drought? Which seed will win? All sorts of things like that. What sort of props are you seeing the most action coming in on in these first few days of betting?
On these big events, and we see it in the Super Bowl, and we're seeing it again, the early business, when you first go up, it's all the chalk. Mm-hmm. Gonzaga to win their region. The number 1 seeds to progress to sort of Elite 8, Sweet 16. What we start to see as the tournament gets closer, come Thursday and Friday, that's when we start to see the interesting bets. The social occasional gamblers coming in, having their $10 and $20 on something at big odds. But at the moment, we're seeing lots of solid big bets for number 1 seeds. We have seen a little bit of money for Texas in the state market, which state will win. Seems to be on, you have Baylor, but then you sort of got Texas, Houston. Yep. You've just got the people like to have 5 teams running for them who are sort of all under 25-1. I'm probably happy to lay that as well.
Don't forget Abilene Christian. Maybe Abilene Christian goes on a little bit of a run here and gets themselves a Cinderella story in this 2021 tournament. Jason Scott, thanks so much for joining us. Going to be with us every episode here of Ding You as we take you through the NCAA championship. Jason, thanks again for being here with us today.
Thanks, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
As we said, BetMGM, our partner for this and presenting Ding You. You can register right now with BetMGM using the bonus code AthleticMM. Bet $1 to win $100 when any of the Athletics picks win their first-round matchup. Plus, we'll give you a free 1-year subscription to The Athletic so you can experience the absolute best coverage of the tourney and everything else on the sports calendar. Go to BetMGM.com. Use the promo code AthleticMM when you sign up. New BetMGM customer offer. Paid and free bets. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. Let's keep things rolling here, you guys. As I said, any questions you might have, please throw them in there. We are happy to take them. But for the time being, Brian and I are going to talk about some of the things that everyone is talking about this week as they are filling out their brackets. Who's getting upset? Who's that double-digit team that is going to make a Sweet 16 and Elite 8 run, something along those lines? Let's start right there, Brian. Double-digit seeds that we think are going to make a Sweet 16 run. I will check to you, speaking of gambling, and let you take this one first.
Sure. Actually, I wrote a story that ran Monday morning called Finding Cinderella on our site, and I give you 5 double-digit seeds to take a look at. I think we have a good chance to be that kind of Cinderella, but my number 1 choice, going into the tournament, and especially when I saw the matchup, is Winthrop. I love Winthrop, 23-1. Only lost one game all year by 2 points at home. A game they led by 8 with a couple minutes left. Team that plays differently than anybody else. They play 11 or 12 guys. They bring in hockey shifts for their substitution patterns, 5 minutes at a time. They play super fast, top 10 pace in the country. They've got a good big man, 6'10" DJ Burns. They've got a great point guard who's 6'7" and Chandler Valdrin. Got 6 triple doubles. This is a team I really like. And then when you look at Villanova's issues with Colin Gillespie being injured, they haven't won since. I think there's going to be some issues with keeping Burns on the floor defensively against Villanova style, but I really like this Winthrop team a lot. They're very talented, used to winning, and I like them to get to the Sweet 16.
I mean, this is going to be a 12-5 where more people are on the 12, just straight up to win. Forget about with the points. I mean, this is going to be easily the most popular 12-5 upset of this 2021 tournament. Reminds me of the 2019 tournament, the last tournament we had where Oregon was a consensus pick over Wisconsin, and that went in Oregon's favor. You mentioned it too, right? The Villanova, no Colin Gillespie, a second-round matchup with the winner of Purdue or North Texas. And again, Purdue is a high floor but a low ceiling team this season. So Winthrop definitely feeling like a team that can make that Sweet 16 run. I'm going to flip it over to the other side of the bracket and talk about Ohio, a team that I already mentioned a little bit here. Jason Preston. I mean, when I look for a team that is going to be an underdog in its first 2 games, or at least expected to be in the second game, should have pulled the upset in the first one, I want to trust a team that has a guy who can put them on his back and carry them, who can put up 30, 35 and carry them to a victory. We saw that way back at the start of the season. Jason Preston, Ohio announced themselves with him putting up 31 in a near loss against Illinois. I mean, this is just a guy who can really carry an underdog team. And I look at the draw that Ohio has going up against a Virginia team that is dealing with its COVID issues right now. Would get the winner of Creighton and UCSB if they were able to pull the upset against Virginia. Creighton is a team that can really score it, but obviously is not really going to intimidate you too much. And Ohio, I think, can match them there. UCSB, right, going to play a similar style to Creighton. So that's another one of the most anticipated 12-5 matchups in the tournament. But again, it just comes back for me to Jason Preston. If I'm going to bet on a 13 seed to go to the Sweet 16, I want them to have a true go-to player. Ohio definitely has that in Preston. So that is where I lean here. We talk now about a top 5 seed that we think is going to get upset in the first round. Everyone's always going to look to a 12-5. We're not necessarily talking 16-1 or 15-2 here, but we could be talking 14-3. 13-4. I put out Villanova, for all the reasons you said. You put out Virginia as one of the teams, I think, for a lot of the reasons I said. So let's put those teams to the side and talk about a couple other teams that you like here, because I'm not so sure I'm on board with these. But you've got Purdue and Creighton as teams that are in some serious upset trouble. Tell us why.
Yeah, Purdue, they're playing North Texas. North Texas is a team that's top 25 in defense this year. I don't know if you watched the Conference USA title game against Western Kentucky, a very talented team. It was 48-48 going into overtime. They like to really muck things up. They've got a little bit of size. They got a great closer in Javion Hamlet, who I've kind of called the Io DeSumo Jr. He's smaller, but he was the Conference USA Player of the Year last year and got edged out for that this year by Charles Bassey, but he closed that game out. He has no fear. And we mentioned Purdue. Purdue, again, I think you're right. High floor, low ceiling, very, very young team. They do have Travion Williams, who has a little bit of experience, and he's a load down there. But North Texas has a guy who's 6'10", 250, I think could at least, bang around with him a little bit down there. And then with Creighton, I really like this UCSB team, the Santa Barbara. They have high major talent. All 5 of their starters either started their career at a high major program or 4-star recruits. So they really have more talent than you usually see, especially from a team out of the Big West. Creighton coming off that really bad blowout loss against Georgetown. You wonder where their heads are. And again, you see Santa Barbara has some size, a good rebounding team. Got a 6'10" stretch 4 Miles Norris, 6'9" all-conference post player inside. And Creighton is not a really physical team. So I do like Creighton, but I think that is a possible upset to watch.
Yeah, it's going to be another very fun one, another very popular one. You've got KenPom calling for a 7-point victory for Creighton, but that's just got the signature of a game that the underdog could end up sticking around and playing the sort of pace that the favorite wants to play. And if that ends up being the case, we could be looking at another 12-5 upset, the hallmark of the NCAA tournament. Finally here, let's talk about a top 3 seed that we don't think is going to make it to the second weekend. So we're not necessarily saying that this is going to be a first-round loss, but a team that isn't going to be playing in the Sweet 16. I'll take this one first. I think Houston is in some serious trouble here, Brian. I look mostly at that second-round matchup. I like that to be Rutgers against Houston, and Rutgers just – with what happened with this team last year, they were going to break this huge drought that this program has had for so long and finally make the tournament. Then the tournament doesn't happen. A huge disappointment for teams like Rutgers, like San Diego State, like Dayton, that were going to have a chance at a special season last year. They come back this year, and Rutgers, maybe not quite the ceiling that it had a season ago, but I think still a very dangerous team. I think they match up well with Clemson in the first round. I think they, probably bring maybe the best player to the floor in the game. And I think that they could give Houston a lot of trouble in a potential second round matchup. So I think Houston goes down, and, I'm not totally sleeping on Cleveland State against Houston. This is a team that has won a ton of games this season. Very good coming out of the Horizon League. They also have plenty of experience on that team and guys who can take over the game. So I think that, I'm not going to sit here and say Cleveland State over Houston. Book it. Let's go. Let's go take that 20-point underdog to win straight up. But I think Houston might have its hands full a little bit more than Cleveland State is getting credit for. I think that's a dangerous 15-2, and we have seen plenty of dangerous 15-2s in the past. But then moving on to the second round, I think Rutgers is the team that ends up coming out of that pod and moving on to the Sweet 16. So Houston, a team that I am fading. What's one that you're fading?
Well, you're giving Indiana fans flashbacks with that Cleveland State upset pick. That's a pretty bold one. I like that. Well, I like most of the top 3 seeds in this tournament. I think we're going to see a lot of them make it to the second weekend. So I'm going to hedge my bets a little bit with Kansas. Kansas, another one of those teams that's having COVID issues, had to pull out of the Big 12 tournament. David McCormack wasn't going to play in the tournament, even if they'd been able to stay in that tournament. Mm-hmm. Don't know his status. Don't know the status of really anyone on the team at this point, where they're going to be when they suit up. I still think they'll get past Eastern Washington, although that's a pretty good team, a good coach, Ashante Lagans, who's a really rising coach. But I think they'll get through that one. But then you start to look at some of the second round matchups that are possible. If Drake gets there, then I don't think Kansas is going to lose to Drake. But they could play Wichita State, and that is an absolute holy war for Wichita State to be able to play Kansas. And I think they would be so fired up for that. We saw what happened last time that happened. And then you have USC, another potential second round matchup. Mm-hmm. Evan Mobley would be just really difficult for Kansas to contain, as well as Dave McCormack played. Down the stretch, he's still not super mobile, I don't think. And a guy like Evan Mobley could really make life difficult on him. So when you combine what Kansas has going on in its own camp versus some of the teams that could play, and the fact that I think, although Kansas played better, I don't think this is a supremely talented team. So that's my pick for a top 3 seed to go down.
Yeah, Evan Mobley, that would be, that's a load for any team to handle, and Kansas would not be alone in that if they were to struggle with him and USC, if that is indeed a second round matchup. We've got a Kansas expert coming on here in just a couple of minutes. We're going to have to run that idea by him. But first, we're all trying to eat better right now. Healthy breakfast doesn't have to be boring. Magic Spoon has the flavors you love without all the bad stuff. 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and only 4 net grams of carbs in each serving. Available flavors to build your own very custom bundle are cocoa, fruity, frosted, peanut butter, and cinnamon. Right now, go to magicspoon.com/ding, that's D-I-N-G, to grab the new limited edition cookies and cream maple waffle or a custom bundle of the flavors we had earlier. Be sure to use our promo code DING at checkout to save $5 off your order. Offer is good anywhere in the U.S. or Canada, but only when you use our code at checkout. And Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it is backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. You don't like it for any reason, they will refund it, no questions asked. Remember, get your next delicious bowl of guilt-free cereal at magicspoon.com/ding. Use the code DING to save $5. Unhappy with your smile? You don't have to be. Thousands of people have used Candid, the clear, comfortable, removable, and practically invisible aligners to help straighten their teeth, and now they love their smile. Candid is here to help you straighten your teeth so you can fall in love with your smile too. Your treatment is prescribed and closely monitored remotely by a licensed orthodontist who is an expert in tooth movement. You'll have the same quality of care you'd get from an in-office orthodontist from the comfort and convenience of your home. Become the best you can be. Start straightening your teeth today. Right now, you can save $75 on Candid starter kit. Just go to candidco.com/ding and use code DING. That's candidco.com/ding. Code DING. Take advantage of this limited time offer to save $75 on your starter kit. candidco.com/ding, code DING. All right, let's move on from that and let's get to that aforementioned Kansas expert. We've got a couple of our athletic college basketball colleagues joining us on the show today. First up is CJ Moore. CJ, of course, covers Kansas for us here at The Athletic. CJ also very close and knowledgeable about all the teams in the Big 12. CJ, thanks for joining us today. Let me say, before we get going, before we ask you our first question for you, I want to let you know that when we were preparing this show, Brian was crowing to me about winning your against the spread picks pool this season. The two of you and Seth Davis. Brian was patting himself on the back, saying that he was the winner there. So just want to let you know what's going on behind your back.
Yeah, it's like beating a bunch of slow kids in a race.
Yeah, I only finished at 52%, so it's not that much to brag about.
I think I was a couple games below 500, so it wasn't a great showing. So what better guest to have on a gambling show than a guy that
Yeah, there we go. You got to love that. Let's talk about Baylor here, CJ, a team you know very well, a team that is obviously among the favorites to win the championship. If they do end up getting tripped up before the Final Four, where do you see it happening? Where's the biggest hurdle for them between right now and getting to the Final Four?
Oh man, I think I don't think the second round is that tough. Like I think there's tougher 8-9 teams out there. I'm just going to start off right away because I don't see you throwing any shade in the Big Ten. But from what I've been listening to so far, it just sounds like all kinds of Big Ten homerism. So I don't think North Carolina or Wisconsin's too troublesome for them. I actually think the 4 or 5 seeds are manageable there with Purdue, and obviously Villanova's not the Villanova that we know. So I think the biggest hurdle for Baylor getting to a Final Four will probably be whoever the Bears end up playing in the Elite Eight, if they get there. And Ohio State would be a tough matchup, but I think basically Arkansas obviously has been hot, but I honestly feel like with both Gonzaga and Baylor, the committee did them some favors in terms of how their brackets lined up. I don't think that there's like any opponent it's really, really a terrible matchup. Purdue could be tough because you saw David McCormick have success against them in their first loss this season. Travion Williams is maybe a guy that could give them problems. They don't, Baylor has length and big guys, but they don't have like a monster in the post. So maybe that's it. Although I do love my boy Jonathan Chuma Chachawa. I think I got it right there.
Nailed it.
I wrote a story on him, but I can't say his name.
We'll leave that pronunciation to you for sure. CJ, I want to ask you about a team you probably don't know a whole lot about, and that is Kansas. They obviously reinvented themselves in the second half of the season, but had to pull out of the Big 12 tournament. I just picked them as a top 3 seed. I thought might lose before the second weekend just because their second round matchup could be pretty difficult. But what are your expectations for Kansas, knowing what you know about where they are at this point?
Man, it's going to be tough to see how that all plays out because, I think they will have David McCormick back, which will be big for them because, they play through him a ton. I mean, he is a very high usage player. One of the players they're going to have out, I don't think it's any secret if you check Twitter. You can find out who that is, a starter. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it based on how we handle COVID at The Athletic, but it's going to be a challenge just because Brian, you hit it on the nail where you said that they're not talented as they usually are at KU. But I will say the one time when you usually are doubting Bill Self is the time that he usually comes through. Yeah. So I think KU's got a decent shot to get to the second weekend, but in that USC game, even if KU's got a full roster, like USC's higher ranked than them at KenPom, so KU's is probably going to be an underdog if the game against USC ends up happening.
Correct me if I'm wrong, CJ, but one of the biggest upsets in Kansas history was a 14-3 game, right, with Bucknell. That was a 14-3 matchup, I believe, all those years ago. So maybe some tough memories for Kansas fans being on the 3 line. We've talked about Oklahoma State a ton, but I think they're one of, if not the most interesting team in the tournament because of how they come into this year, because of Cade Cunningham, because of the fact that they were maybe the most underseeded team in the field and are now staring down a potential Sweet 16 matchup with arguably the hottest team in the country in Illinois. So let's fast forward to that matchup happening with something we all want to see. How did Cade and the Cowboys take down Iowa in the Illini?
Illinois is so high right now, but I think that, Cade is a guy that he does anything to win, right? Like I keep getting these as they were playing in the Big 12 tournament, I kept getting texts from coaches like, man, guy's so poised, such a winner, stuff like that. Like he just rises to the occasion. He hits big shots. He can kind of, like, no matter how you play him in the pick and roll, he can manipulate that coverage and find his guys. And I don't think the team has gotten any better from November to now than Oklahoma State. So how they beat Illinois? Well, they like to switch up their defenses. They could throw some zone at them. Illinois is so good at getting into the paint and playing through Kofi and getting Io to go downhill. So maybe they're able to kind of keep them out of the paint, make them make perimeter shots, which they're a good perimeter shooting team. But in the tournament, you never know. In 40 minutes, you can go cold really easily.
CJ, I am all in on this Texas team. Love them. They're my dark horse national title contender, even though that horse is not really all that dark after winning the Big 12 title. But I think people know all about them at this point. But is there another Big 12 team that maybe people aren't talking about at all? I mean, there were 7 great teams out of that league. Was there another one who could maybe make a run in this league, in this tournament, excuse me?
Yeah, I'm with you on Texas. I mean, that's one of my Final Four picks. I can't quit that team. I've been high on them all year. I think that's a top 5 roster in college basketball. So I think you're onto something there. Maybe Texas Tech, like Chris Beard. We've seen him roll through this tournament before. They don't have the same kind of roster that they had that made the national championship game a few years ago. And I think what they're missing is like an elite rim protector. But the offense is, you could argue the offense is maybe a tinge better than that team was. And Mac McClung is like about as exciting as any player to watch in college basketball. Like when stuff gets crazy, Mac McClung thrives. So late in games, you could see him. They had a late rally. Who was it against? Who was their SEC? It was LSU. I don't know if people saw that game this year, but like that was one of the craziest rallies you'll ever see. So Texas Tech, you can see them going around. That's a staff that I think does a really, really good job preparing in a small window. So maybe the Red Raiders, that team, I don't know. I feel like everybody else in the Big 12 is getting talked about other than Oklahoma, and I don't like OU's chances as much against Gonzaga. So
no, probably if they get past Missouri, probably not going to be the team that takes down the Zags. And hey, Texas Tech plus 800 to win that South region, the 3rd best odds, better than the 3, 4, and 5 seeds in their own region. So putting some faith certainly in Chris Beard's history, Mac McClung, and what the Red Raiders might be able to do over the next couple of weeks. CJ Moore, he'll be with us all throughout DNU, and you can follow his work, of course, at The Athletic. Check him out on Twitter at CJ Moore Hoops. CJ, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, fellas. Had fun.
Thanks, CJ.
All right, one more athletic writer joining the show here this afternoon. It is Eamonn Brennan. Eamonn, very close to all things college basketball, including, of course, the bubble, and we're going to ask him certain things about that and how those bubble teams might be dangerous over the next couple of weeks. But Eamonn, first place I want to start with you is with the Virginia Cavaliers, another team like we just talked about with Kansas that is dealing with some COVID issues, had to pull out of the ACC tournament last week. Where do things stand with Virginia as they are getting ready for a first round matchup with Ohio?
Yeah, I mean, I think they stand where they stood on Sunday night when Virginia had a press conference and Tony Bennett sort of talked about their plan, which was to kind of play things take things a day at a time. Try and get everybody fully, quarantined and tested and cleared, and then get down on Friday to Indianapolis. So whether they'll have practice time, whether they'll have the ability to walk through, in the gym, seems unlikely. It's a very sort of, without making light of COVID and the seriousness of protocols and all that good stuff, it feels a little bit like an AAU team, knowing that they have a tournament at the weekend, but, 1 or 2 of the players also have a soccer tournament that weekend. So they're trying to figure out whether or not everybody's going to go. And they may show up late. It's that sort of level of logistical certainty at this point. So, it's not an ideal situation. Now, I don't know. I don't think we have even as much certainty as sort of the Kansas situation, which I heard you guys talking about in the previous segment a little bit, in terms of guys that tested positive that weren't available for conference tournaments, that whole thing. Because once Virginia popped a positive test, they just shut down, and the ACC, they were out of the tournament without any sort of announcements about players not being available, that sort of thing. So there still isn't even that much certainty as to whether the player who tested positive, who apparently, according to reporting, played against Syracuse the day before, is going to be available for the tournament, or whether the whole roster is available. All that stuff is still up in the air. So that said, there's a possibility that a full strength Virginia appears this weekend at the NCAA tournament. There's also a possibility that it's not a full strength, and either way, it doesn't seem like they're going to have the normal preparation that you'd like to have for a tournament, regardless of who's available.
Eamonn is the best bubble watcher in the country by far, and he's the only other guy that I know for sure was up watching Colorado State, Utah State at 3 a.m. with me the other day. But of all the work you did on these bubble teams, now that the ones have gotten in, is there one that you look at that you think maybe can actually make a run that it's gotten in now?
I mean, the obvious one, I think there are a couple obvious ones. The first one is Michigan State. Because it's Michigan State. It's Tom Izzo. I think if you look at wins above expectation in the NCAA tournament for the past 20 years, I think he's tops. So that kind of aligns with everybody's sort of semi-cliched but very real understanding of what Tom Izzo's teams are all about, particularly this time of year. And putting them in the first four is especially interesting because we see first four teams every year. It's a little different this year, but we see first four teams every year playing a game, getting a game into their legs early, playing again 2 nights later, they win that, and then all of a sudden they're a win away from the second weekend. And I think we've had ever since the first four started, at least one of those teams has made the Sweet 16. So that sounds like Michigan State to me, right? Like particularly given the way they played down the stretch to get themselves into the tournament, to beat 3 top 5 teams in a matter of a couple weeks. That's an obvious one that I think probably most even casual college basketball fans don't need me to name. Another one that's semi-obvious is Syracuse. And I think you and I had roughly similar conceptions about Syracuse's ability to get into the tournament. I was maybe a little bit higher on them vis-a-vis Louisville than you were, but it was really close. And there was really sort of both of those resumes you could see being like, blah, like the committee just throwing both of them out at the end of the day if someone else had emerged or if another bid had been stolen. Cincinnati had won the American Conference tournament. You could have seen Syracuse being the last team not to get in. But given all that, their resume, I think right now is worse than they actually are on the floor. Buddy Boeheim has gotten really hot. He is a legitimate, sort of big time stretch wing scorer at this point in his career, which is not something I ever expected to say about Buddy Boeheim. But he's really good. He was really good against Virginia, which is a really good defensive team. It's worth remembering before Virginia shut down and Duke shut down and all that stuff, that noon game against Virginia in the ACC tournament, Syracuse took them to the wire, and Virginia needed a buzzer beater at the last second from Reese Beekman to advance. So I think Syracuse right now is playing really well. I think Jim Boeheim has figured out sort of his best rotations and his best looks. They're not a good team, but we've seen, again, time and again in the NCAA tournament, that Syracuse zone can give people a lot of trouble. It's one thing to see it in your league twice a year and to have a pretty good understanding of it. It's another to have seen nothing like it all year and trying to prepare for it on 2 nights notice, particularly, is really, really difficult. So that's another really, right on the bubble team that I think is a team that could give, depending on San Diego State, could give people some issues further in the bracket.
Yep, San Diego State preparing for that 2-3 zone as we speak. And then if seeds hold, it would be West Virginia potentially getting Syracuse in the second round. I want to ask you about another bubble team right in your backyard. How about Georgetown, a team that was, I guess they weren't really a bubble team because they needed to win the Big East tournament to get into the tournament. They beat Villanova without Colin Gillespie. They end Seton Hall season. They just roll right over Creighton in the Big East championship. And here they are, dancing once again. What's your read on Georgetown going into the big dance?
Yeah, my read on them all year was that I sort of completely ignored them in a lot of ways because it was just like, even being this close in DC was like, okay, well, they're not going to be very good. It's a rebuilding year. Wrote about them a bunch in the offseason, wrote about them a little bit early on in the year, but it was just sort of a write-off year in a lot of ways. I mean, he put together a roster after losing so many players last season from a team that was probably going to make the NCAA tournament before everything fell apart. Had 9 new guys this year. Qudus Wahab was really the one player you look at and say that's a guy you can build around for the future. Some seniors and Jamarco Pickett and Javon Blair kind of leftovers, and not to be too rude about it, but that's kind of what they were. They were bench guys before the roster fell apart last season, and they both ended up playing like 40 minutes a game down the stretch because they basically had 5 available players. He kind of pieced together, like Chudi Bile, a guy from way off the radar down in the lower reaches of Division I who's been really good. Dante Harris from Arkansas, sort of a transfer who did not have a good season last year, and then is looking like mini Allen Iverson in the Garden. I mean, it's been a totally surprising turn of events. I will say they did play well down the stretch. They did get better this season. They weren't it's not like they were ranked 151st in Ken Pom or something, showed up at the Big East tournament and then won 4 games completely out of nowhere. They won 4 of 6 down the stretch. They beat Seton Hall, beat Xavier, kind of helped kill those teams at large bids before stealing a bid in the NCAA tournament. And yeah, they've been guarding really, really well. I mean, defensively, they were great against Creighton and everyone took notice of that, but they were really good the day before against Seton Hall. I think they have a chance to really give Colorado some issues because I've watched Colorado a fair amount this year, particularly with Bubble Watch and staying up late for those Pac-12 games on the West Coast. And I like Colorado a lot. If they're moving the ball, McKinley Wright's running at people, they're getting open shots, corner threes, all that good stuff. They're a really, really good offensive team. But if they get bogged down, they don't have a whole lot on the back line or on the other end of the floor to stop you. And I think if Georgetown could just make it ugly, bog them down, get into McKinley Wright, play over on screens with him, give him a hard time, make the game ugly, play it in the 50s or low 60s, Georgetown absolutely has a chance to win.
Even you have, I think, Alabama coming out of the East region. I love that team, love Nate Oates, love the style they play. But my question is, have any concerns with that style of play in March, especially the pace? We get these long timeouts, these commercials and replay reviews and teams that want to really bog them down. Does that concern you at all going into March at a style like this?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something to that. I think my biggest thing with Alabama is just defense. I think it's incredibly impressive and has been all year. We sort of starting off with Alabama this year and writing the power rankings every week, which I did, and they sort of being like, oh, Alabama's good, and them getting in sort of in January or whatever. It was like, wow, look at this fast offensive team that shoots a ton of threes and no mid-range jumpers and free throws and layups. And they're like the James Harden of college basketball teams. Isn't this crazy? Yep. And then you get midway through the conference season and they're not doing that. I mean, they're still playing that way on the offensive end and they still want to run. But what their real strength was is not offense. They're a pretty decent offensive team in the SEC. I mean, they were the second best, but they weren't, I think they're 1.06 points per possession, something like that. That's good, but it's not amazing. Consider Gonzaga is 1.3 or something in the West Coast Conference. It's a totally different ball game, but they're the best defensive team in the SEC, despite playing that fast. I think that's what gives me a bit of reassurance about their sort of baseline, their foundation as whatever happens in the tournament, if like we said with Georgetown, things get bogged down, they can still get stops on one end of the floor. I think we saw that in the SEC title game with LSU. They won it on a stop. It's a team that gets stops over and over again and that still plays fast and puts you under pressure on the other end. I agree with you. I love that team. I love the style, have all year, but have been especially impressed with how well they're able to play defense while still playing at their pace.
Yeah, playing exactly like James Harden might not be the best way to win a championship, as we've seen.
Yeah, well, they don't play defense like James Harden. Let's put it that way.
That's right.
James Harden offense with a little bit better of showing on the other end of the floor. That's Eamonn Brennan, a great showing here on this episode of Ding You. Eamonn, thanks again for joining us today. We'll be talking to you throughout this year, so enjoy the tournament, my friend.
Looking forward to it. You guys as well.
Thanks, Eamonn.
All right, we are just about wrapping up this debut episode of Ding You, and what better way to do it than with a look at my and Brian's Final Four and National Championship picks. I wish mine was a little bit more fun. I'm going to let you go first here, though. Brian, walk us through your Final Four and your National Champion.
Yeah, it's not super exciting either, but I just think that the top seeds have really distinguished themselves and separated themselves this year. And obviously Gonzaga, I love them in the Final Four. Baylor, I think they've got a good draw. Illinois is playing better as well as anybody in the country. And then I mentioned my love for Texas, and I think they've got a pretty good shot of coming out of the East as well. So that's my Final Four: 3 1s and a 3. Not super exciting again, but I love these 1 seeds this year. We got Gonzaga over Baylor. I mean, those have been the 2 teams all year long. Baylor's dipped a little bit here lately. Their defense hasn't been quite as good, but get them out of the Big 12, playing some different teams that have to really deal with that. I think this is the game we all wanted to see, a couple weeks ago, and I'd still love to see it. So that's my pick.
Yeah, when we were talking to Jason Scott from BetMGM earlier and asking him about props, I was hoping he was going to bring up the number of 1 seeds to make the Final Four prop, because right now over 2.5 1 seeds to make the Final Four is sitting at plus 330. And, we don't see it very often. There's a reason why that's plus 330, even as good as the 1 seeds are this season. But I'm with you. I like that a lot this season. I've got it just a little bit different than you do. I just don't see it. Like, we have watched so much Gonzaga and so much Baylor this season that any argument against them making the Final Four requires you to do some mental gymnastics. And, Gonzaga has, I think, the cleanest path to the Final Four of any team in the tournament. No offense to Ohio State, a very good team. Could they beat Baylor? Of course they could beat Baylor in the Elite Eight, but, Baylor just such a diverse offense and, such great athleticism, such great guard play. We know how important that is. A team that was right here, ready to do something similar a year ago, brings back most of that team and is doing it again this year. I just really don't see any team getting in either of their way. I'm riding the Cade Cunningham train in the Midwest. I hate to take Illinois out here with the way that they're playing, and maybe one of the best inside-outside duos in Ayo Dosunmu and Kofi Cockburn, but I want to differentiate a little bit, and I think Oklahoma State is a good way to do that. We've talked so much in this show about how they are underseeded. This is really more a 3 seed rather than a 4. I hate that this is a Sweet 16 matchup that we're probably looking at, but I will ride with Oklahoma State to come out of the Midwest. And then I've been sort of hinting at it all episode. I just think that if and when Isaiah Livers is back, Michigan is back to being the team that put themselves in a group with Gonzaga and Baylor for so long, for December, January, even into February. We were thinking, this is Gonzaga, Baylor, and everyone else. And then for a stretch there before Michigan had its COVID shutdown, we talked about them as making this a 3-team group at the top of the country. And I think that with Livers back, they would deserve to be in that group as well. So I will go with that as the Final Four, and then I'm with you. It's chalky. It's boring. I wish I could throw a 7 seed and a 5 seed in here, but I just don't see how Gonzaga and Baylor get slowed down or get stopped by anyone other than Gonzaga or Baylor. And Gonzaga, I've watched a ton of them this season. I think we all have. And there's really no doubting that when they bring their A game, there's really no playing with them. They can bring their B- game and still beat some of the best teams in the country. So I think it'll be Gonzaga going 32-0, being the first team since 1976 Indiana to go undefeated, wire-to-wire #1 team in the country this season. And that's where things stand in our Final Four and our national championship game. And that's where things stand. That's where things end for this first episode of Ding You. To all of you out there who tuned in, thank you so much. As I said, we're going to be doing this all tournament long. We will be with you again tomorrow, taking a look at the first 4, and then again on Thursday, taking a look at the first round games. Thank you to Jason Scott from BetMGM, CJ Moore, and Eamonn Brennan for joining us on this episode. And Mike Zimmerman behind the scenes, our producer. Thank you as well. Brian, this was fun. We got our feet wet, but we're just getting started here. Plenty more to go.
Can't wait. I still can't believe you only have 1 Big Ten team in your Final Four. But
don't listen. We've gone long enough. Don't get me started on what this disaster of a Wisconsin season was this year. I could make this another hour long if we got on that train. So I'm just going to leave it there. Thank you, everyone, for watching us here on Ding You. If you're just tuning in at the end, you missed it. Good news. This will be running as a podcast as well on the Daily Ding feed. So check us out there as well. We'll be with you tomorrow. Enjoy filling out those brackets.